everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode. Let's try again. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Called Together for our table talk session. And apparently I need more coffee as I just flubbed some things, but hey, we do real life here at our table talks. So my guest today is Ron Clifford. And as you know, on some of our table talks, we will talk about marketplace ministry, church ministry, family, all of the things, and with a lot of testimonies of God stories in there. So first, let me say my guest Ron today, he actually has a photography business and membership, and he just helps people be really cool. So if you are a photographer, you can connect with him. But today, we're actually not going to talk about photography. We might do that another day. We're actually going to talk about family stuff. And so Ron, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to our table talk.
I'm man, I told you before we went on that as I'm doing these table talks, my life is enriched by getting to meet all of you. And so even just our little pre-talk, I'm just so glad to have got to meet you. So talk us through today, just your story of what God has done in your family. And just so our listeners know that this is like some really good, heartfelt ups and downs, like a seismograph, right? Of just family life. But then God's mercy is just woven through it. And I'm just going to make a request. I need you to share a little bit about your house in what you're going to be sharing, because you shared a little with me before, and I just thought it was so brilliant. So I have a special request. Work the house into your story. So tell us about your family.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm been married to my wife for 31 years. And I am today the most fortunate man in the world. I have 4 adult children, and I have 2 grandchildren, and get to spend a lot of time with them.
Yeah.
And I guess if we wind it back, every story has a beginning. And in my beginning, and I think I'll preface it, this is really tough because I'm really going off the cuff. I've really very little prepared notes.
I know this is great. These are supposed to be like coffee time with our audience. So this is so brilliant.
So I'm gonna ask for direction for this because I grew up in what I used to consider a normal North American home. What I later found out was highly dysfunctional, with alcoholic parents who suffered from undiagnosed and later diagnosed mental illness, and divorced when I was 10, and left me completely lost. I was completely alone. And by the time I was 15, I lived on my own, and I faced the world on my own. And I married into parenthood. My wife had a 3-year-old daughter, and I married into a family. And I think what I would communicate is I had no guidebook. I had no no skills as a parent. I had no modeling. And while I won't say my parents were all horrible, my parents did everything they could with the tools at hand, with the struggles they had.
Yeah.
Sometimes that leaves us very unprepared.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'll say about that. I want to advance, though, and I don't want to spend too much time in that story.
Yeah.
I was able to overcome my own mental illness and addiction struggles in my life. And a lot of that transpired much later in life. So while I was came to accept Christ as Savior in my 20s, just prior to marriage, things fell apart again in my late 30s or mid 30s to early 40s. And there was kind of a regression. Again, the lack of a roadmap, small decisions that led down a path that started causing destruction again. I don't want to get deep in that story, but I was delivered from that. So in a moment, I was re-delivered from addiction, to find out I was having a different struggle. The struggle was mental illness. And I didn't understand I had an undiagnosed mental illness until I was hospitalized. And so for parents out there, for people who are in leadership, people who have that role, probably the most impactful thing in my life was an accurate diagnosis to an undiagnosed mental illness that led to a
Yes.
path of recovery. And so while I had been a Christian for years, things in my life kept spiraling. I kept going through these cycles of spiral, and I didn't know what they were.
Mm.
And so it turns out I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, and I do a lot of speaking on that. I won't focus on that so much today, but my recovery was slower than I wanted, but in the
Yeah.
end, miraculous. I live today unmedicated with very few signs of living with a mental illness. In fact, my psychiatrist gave me a form that said I don't have it here, but I find no evidence of a mental illness in this man today, which is
Amazing.
extremely rare for a bipolar diagnosis.
Yes.
And it turns out, as we look back, my mother was bipolar. My sister is bipolar. My dad suffered from depression and alcoholism. And so there were indicators that today we understand that family history can play a lot into what's happening
Sure.
here.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, you wanted me to get to the house. I want to talk about the house. I live
Yeah.
in the house that Faith built.
Mm.
So during that transition, we had, I wasn't well. And I was trying to figure things out. And my marriage was in deep trouble
Mhm.
at this time. And my wife and I had separated for a while. And I was staying up at our trailer, and I was living in an apartment. And she had to make some decisions. I wasn't capable of making many decisions
Yeah.
at that time. I was a mess. I was a real mess. My life was undone. And so I went from seeming like having my whole life together, running a business and having a family and going to church, and like we were the model family, right?
Right.
And then, you know, I found myself completely undone, completely out of control, and in desperate need of restoration.
Mm.
You know, there's a saying, and this is a difficult one, and I won't quote it properly. I wish I had it written down. I didn't know I was going to bring it up today, but
I know I totally put you on the spot before we went live.
the the greatest tragedy, the thing that has the deepest impact on
Mm.
children
Yeah.
is the unlived life of a parent. And I don't mean that to say maybe the parent who committed suicide. I mean that to say the parent who never reached for their potential, the
Right.
parent who couldn't overcome the obstacles. Uh, I get
Yeah, I
emotional.
agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so at that time, I was incapable of decision making. My wife called me and she said, "I want you to come down. We needed to sell our house. We needed to buy a different house." And she said, "I want you to come down. I think I found the house that I'm going to buy." And so I came down and I walked into this house. This house was built in 1860 in old Newmarket, Ontario, north of Toronto. And it's a Georgian style home, very utilitarian. Um, and I think the neighbors hoped that the next person to buy it was going to plow it down.
Mm.
I'm convinced they were. And I walked into the house and she started showing me around, and it was really awful. It had boards on the windows because kids had come and vandalized it, and
Mm.
the axe marks in the walls, and there was grime everywhere, and nothing had been touched for 60 years. Yeah, it was a disaster. And
Mm.
I looked around, and inside me, it was like this little voice that said, "This is it. This is your home. This is."
Mm.
So I said to my wife, and she was showing me around, and I could tell she was really nervous. And I said, I don't know why, but this is it. There's something about this house. This is the one. And she said, "Oh, thank God." Literally, she said, "Because I bought it."
I just, oh man.
And
As
so
you're speaking, I'm making all these like little notations to talk about when you're done. Like this is so good. Yeah, yeah, so good.
we call it the house that Faith built, because not only was the house broken in desperate need of repair, but we were broken. I was broken.
Mm.
And I was going to be able to start rebuilding my life in this house. And it was in this house when I discovered I was bipolar. It was in this house that I became hospitalized and got an accurate diagnosis. And it was
Yeah.
in this house that like my youngest daughter is the only place she knows. Like she's 20 now. So all she remembers is this house.
Yes.
And so we've seen as parents the difference in our children. My 34-year-old oldest daughter, who's given us 2 grandkids, to our youngest, and the effects of my life on their lives.
Yeah.
And there's some pain there. There's some things that I need to work out with God and with them,
Mm.
because the older kids didn't get that better part of me growing up. They
Right.
got the worst part of me. And
Mm.
so I deal with that, and I do my best. And, there's been some apologies, and there's been some honest talks
Yeah.
about the way things are and the way things were.
What would you say to, and I was writing this down because these are such, not just like these cute Pinteresty quotes, but like just God's heart quotes, of like the house that Faith built. And, and I was writing down something that you said that I just want you to talk a little bit about, of going from this model family to becoming like the undone family that really needed restoration in it. And I think that so many times, just, and my story is a little different, but that same sort of thing of being raised in church. My parents' marriage was great. And then they went through a tough spot, got divorced, and so it went from them running, all these Bible studies, whatever. And then life happened to them. Do you know what I mean? And it was, I'm sure, like looking back, we've had conversations like how hard for them, but also it's very hard, for those families that are going through difficult times, that you go from like this model. And did you find that the people around you didn't know how to help you?
A lot, yeah.
Because they have said that, like, it's just, their lives were kind of blowing up. But people just didn't know because they couldn't reconcile. Sometimes they think like, oh, the model family to life.
But yeah, and
Undone.
you got to remember, like, I'm the bad guy in this picture, in this
Mm.
situation. I'm that guy. I'm the
Yeah.
husband that screwed it up, right?
Right.
I'm the husband that started drinking again, or I worked too much, and when I wasn't working, I wasn't home. I'm the guy that people told my wife,
Mm.
you got to get rid of this guy.
Yeah.
I was that guy.
Mm.
She, boy, I can't talk about this without tearing up, because she's
Yeah.
an incredible,
Mm.
faithful woman.
I was just going to say, a woman of faith. Yeah.
Her example through that time, her ability to put her head down and just do what was in front of her, and to do it the best she could to do what was right for her family and in front of God,
Yeah.
was a big reason that I was able to be restored.
Um, you know, um, Speaking of your wife, because there's going to be some that are listening or viewing this that they may be in her position. And I actually have a friend right now that is in her position. And everyone around her, though her husband is dealing with another issue, but it is totally, even in wisdom, would say, like, you need to, be separated from this. And so for her, God has told her, because in her flesh, she's like, yes. And practically, I mean, it's very logical. I mean, it's not out of order. You do know what I mean? But because it's a long-term issue.
Yeah.
And she said, but God told me to stay. Like, he has told me to stay and to love, and not as this doormat, but like really, like she's not blinded to his issues like at all. She knows what they are very clearly. Yeah. And she said, God said no, even though I have reason that I could leave, like I need to. And so, what was your wife's like viewpoint? Like, what made her say, you know what, even though there's times of separation, I'm still committed to, what God has, whatever God has. So just talk a little bit about that.
So to talk about that, I want to talk about just before we got married.
Yeah.
She had our now oldest daughter. I adopted Holly as my own, and our oldest daughter was 3 when we got married. But before we got married, I'd asked my wife so many times to marry me, and she said no, probably 100 times.
Mhm.
And I couldn't understand, because I just believed in my heart and soul that this was the woman that I was going to be with. This was my soulmate. This was my life
Yeah.
mate. And later I found out that she didn't say no because she didn't love me or she didn't think that we would be a good couple. She said no because she wasn't independent and she wouldn't rely on anybody. And she couldn't say yes until she was fully independent.
Mm.
And one day I remember, I'm going to tell 2 stories because they're very similar. One
Yeah,
day I remember
please.
being in my room and crying out to God. And I said, okay, Lord, clearly I misheard this. Clearly this isn't meant to be. And so I'm going to stop asking her to marry me. I'm going to
Yeah.
stop pursuing her. And the very next day I was visiting, and I walked in, she had this silly little smile on her face, and she said, "You can ask me today?" And I said, "What?" She said, "Are you going to ask me to marry you today?"
Mm. Mhm. Now I'm getting teary-eyed with you, so this is good.
And so I asked her, and we agreed to get married.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I married her that September, or not September. We meant to be married in September, but her sister was
Yeah.
pregnant, so we got married in July. Oh, is it hot? Anyway, so the other story, the interesting story was there was my surrender, and
Yeah.
it was incredible response.
Yeah.
Forward to, we're in this house, the house that Faith built, this broken down house, and I had
Yeah.
said to her, it's going to take us at least, you understand, 10 years to rebuild this house.
Yeah.
And I didn't know I was going to go from sick to sicker for a while. Like,
Right.
even though I was getting better, I was getting worse.
Yes.
We didn't quite know what was going on the first couple of years.
Sure.
So here we were restoring the home and restoring our lives.
Yeah.
And it was coming to a point, like I couldn't continue. Like, my life was not getting better. And I remember at that, just then, that transition point where I was still indulging in drinking, which I can't do. I haven't done for many, many years.
Yeah.
And I remember one night realizing the conundrum that I was back when I was 18 years old and realized I'd had a problem.
Mm.
Everything, it was like, I can't believe I'm here again. Like, here I am. And I cried out, Lord, take this from me. I can't do it. I can't do this on my own. I can't. And I literally asked the Lord to take it from me, to remove it. And in an instant, He did. It was a
Yeah.
miraculous removal of my addiction.
Mm.
It was gone.
Yeah.
It has been gone for years. And what was interesting about that was that night, while I was crying out to
Yeah.
God to remove that from me, my wife was praying to God, saying, "I don't believe in divorce, Lord, but tomorrow I'm going to ask Him to leave."
Mm.
So that's the long way around that.
No,
Her
it's
character
so
was
good.
tested to the decision that she was willing to ask me to leave. And
Mm.
again, I surrendered, not knowing anything that was going on in her mind.
Yes.
I had no idea. And I went to her and I told her where I was. I told her what was up, and she became willing to work with me on it. And she had every right to not stay with me.
Mm.
And, I don't know where you're at, in your Christian beliefs and foundations, and we understand that God doesn't like divorce. In fact, He hates divorce.
Yeah.
But He also he hates injustice, and He hates abuse, and He hates mistreatment. And so she's
Yes.
in her right to separate herself from an unhealthy relationship.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you took the story, sharing like a couple stories to get back to that point, because um, I think that sometimes people try to make everything so cookie cutter,
Yeah.
one way or the other. But our humanity is complicated in its brokenness,
Yeah.
and God is bigger than the brokenness. But sometimes people hear stories and they say, "Oh, there were, addiction and mental illness, and but look, they have the house that faith built, and they go to like the happy ending credits."
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
they don't realize that, in that opening intro to that, the roll the credits, that the roll the credits is not even there yet. Like it's still like our whole lifetime. It doesn't have to be what you experienced. It is God always having a heart for restoration. Just some are a lot more, I don't even say heartfelt, but it's just a lot bumpier.
Yeah.
It's a lot bumpier. And so I love that you shared that she really did have moments that she's like, this, like, I have to set some boundaries for the
Yeah.
health of me and the kids. And that she is okay to do that. It doesn't go against like still having a heart for her marriage. And I think that people need to hear that, because so many times when people are in these type of situations, and so I've been pastoring for 22 years in some form or fashion, and just hearing people's stories, and they get some really bad advice from people, um on one side or the other, like, I hate, God hates divorce, that is not biblical, and you just need to live that way, and you just need to show love. And then others are saying, and not with any grace involved at all, like, you need to cut him loose. And there's no grace involved. And then the prayer is they get somebody that walks them through seeing all viewpoints and saying, what is God telling you in this season?
Yeah.
And I think that that's important. So in your wife's story, I think her story and your story are equally important when we see God's heart reflected, because she had hard decisions to make. Even as you were making hard decisions, like you said, of surrendering when you didn't know, she was crying out to God in, tomorrow is, we're going to have this conversation. And from her heart, I can't imagine what she was feeling, because she was torn. Like, so here she is crying out to God on so many levels. And here
Yeah.
you are crying out to God on so many levels. And it wasn't motivated. And this is the part that I think is beautiful. It wasn't motivated by her threatening.
Not at all. I had
You know
no
what I mean?
idea. I
Like,
was
that's
clueless.
the beauty of it, is this
Yeah.
was not, and I think that,
It
and
wasn't
I
like,
want
oh dear, I'm sorry, I won't do it again, I promise, one of those deals at all. In fact, I don't think we ever had that kind of conversation our whole lives.
yes.
I was in a position of utter surrender, and she let me get there, you know?
And what would you say to, what would you say to somebody that is, the bad guy, as you said, in the situation, that is maybe listening or watching, and they might have just stumbled up on this, and they're thinking, this is me.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I loved, about sharing about your house, is that the neighbors were probably hoping someone would buy it to tear it down to put up something better.
Yeah.
And I was just jotting this note down, because I thought, that is such a parable moment, that, for the person in your shoes, you're thinking, my life would be better if it was just bulldozed on some days. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
am I ever even going to be able to restore? And there's got to be moments of weakness. You're like, is it even possible? Do you know what I mean? And then to see that, and so many people married to someone going through what you would say, it's just better to start over and to just bulldoze,
Oh
um,
yeah, that
the
would be
past and
instantly
to
easy.
rebuild. Yes, and the most
Not only is it easy,
logical.
sometimes it's survival. Like I
Right.
want to be really clear.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the easy way, sometimes
Right.
it's survival.
Right.
And that's a conversation between you and God. You
Yes.
know, it really is.
Mm.
If you're in a situation that is dangerous or really unhealthy, you need to decide the level of separation from that situation.
Yes. And I love that you have openly shared both, because this is a messy topic. Um,
Yeah.
because again, it's not like the checklist of self-help that will cookie cutter to get your family from here to roll the credits of the happy ending. It really takes a lot of really God time. I mean, truly. And I love what you said that your wife let you go through your journey on surrendering to God, but that she also had to take ownership of her own surrender to God.
Yeah.
And she was still parenting and mothering her children. And so
So
while she wanted
remember
what was
back
best for
when she
you,
wouldn't marry me, right?
right?
That decision then to
Yeah,
not marry me until she was independent carried through to buying the house because she bought that without me.
right.
And so she
Mm,
bought the only thing she could afford that would fit her whole family and the potential future of staying with me.
right. And
Right?
that's okay. And I think that that is
Yeah.
what like, so many people need to hear, that that is okay. That is not going against her marriage. That is not going against
Oh
God.
no,
It
no,
is
no.
that survival mode. And I think that's so beautiful to just, it's real life. Like it
Yeah.
is real life. What would you say to people? And one of the things that you said about not, you didn't have an accurate diagnosis.
Yeah. So I
And
want to I want to actually get that's a perfect place to get to
yeah,
because the story transitions because I
yeah,
mentioned I'm the most fortunate man in the world, and I want to get to that.
yeah,
I don't want to
yeah,
spend a whole bunch of time in what was bad, but
right.
we've had a rough go. You know, if I'm going to be completely honest, we've faced opposition that I can't imagine
Mm,
today. I don't, like we're only here by God's grace. Some
yes.
of these things are just little
Mm,
pieces of a much bigger pie.
yeah,
So I want to get to that.
yeah.
First, I want to say that my kids have been able to witness my recovery
Mm,
and witness a transformation in a human being by the grace of God.
yeah.
And you
Mm,
can't buy that.
yeah, that's God's beauty.
It doesn't come in a book. It doesn't come in a box.
Yeah.
When I was really sick, I remember thinking, Lord, you say that you turn around what's planned for my destruction for my good, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, Lord, I'd love to see how you're going to do that because this sure doesn't look savable.
Yeah.
And I almost challenged him. You know, it
Mm.
was like, can you really redeem this?
Right, because up to this point, it had seemed to have gotten a little better,
Yeah.
right?
So we got through
Before,
those forgetting things, but
but you hadn't been formally diagnosed
I
yet.
know. So I'm
Right.
not drinking, and I'm trying to restore the house, and I'm trying to go back to work, and I decided to take a day program at the hospital because I'd always been considered depressed. This was
Right.
the depressed attention deficit. I've never met a creative person that doesn't have an attention issue. You know, we're all
Right.
distracted,
Right. Yes.
whether we want to label it or not.
Right. Right.
I'm highly distractible, and I
Yes.
was definitely uh, tended towards depression.
Yeah.
And alcohol was self-medicating for undiagnosed mental illness.
Yeah.
I went to the hospital for a day program because I desperately wanted to get better and I couldn't figure out what was wrong.
Mm,
I'm supposed to be getting better. I don't drink. I have a great family. I have a great life. I'm getting back to work.
mm,
I feel terrible.
yeah.
I wake up wanting to cry, you
Mm,
know, and then through the day, I go from elevation to crashing to elevation to crashing.
mm,
So I went to the hospital. And while I was in the hospital, I learned about different forms of mental illness. And while I was in the hospital, I had a crash that I you know, it was really serious.
yeah.
And I've given talks about this. In my talk, I say that one night, it was really dark. It was really bad because I thought, well, if all of this is going for me and I still feel this way, I don't want to be here.
Right.
And so rather than act on that impulse, I asked
Mhm,
my wife to take me to the hospital and I signed in as a patient.
mm,
And that's when I met a psychiatrist who looked at me. I remember he'd come to me and he'd take notes and he'd ask me all these questions about my past. And the next day he'd come and sit down, take notes and ask me questions about my past. And I think 3 times, 3 days into it. And I'm taking handfuls of pills. I was in no place to argue. And he said, Ron, He said, here's what I think is the issue. He said, you're not depressed. You have bipolar disorder, and it's been undiagnosed, and you've been mistreated.
Mm.
And so I want you to take these medications and start to do these things, and you're going to stay here for a while.
Mm.
And in a matter of days, my head began to clear in a way I'd never experienced.
Mm. I had someone that said, actually, is my husband, that whole diagnosis thing, and he's not on medication now, and he's really been delivered from it. But this whole depression of just being undiagnosed, and he went on medication for a while, and he said, I didn't even know what normal felt like.
No,
To take
for years I didn't have
steps
a normal.
to change habits to know what normal looked like. And there were some other things along with the depression that he dealt with, and he's very open about it, which is why I'm sharing it. And those like mood swings, like, do you know what I mean? And he said,
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know even that isn't normal, even though people would tell me it wasn't normal, but I didn't even know what normal felt like. It's like talking another language. And so that medication really helped in that front to know what normal was. And so would you encourage people to take the brave step of getting that diagnosis and not feeling like a failure if they have to be on medication, whether long-term or for a while? What would you say to them? Because some see it, or maybe people
This
have
is such
preached.
an important conversation. Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, because people have preached that if you're a Christian, you should not, you don't need medication. And it's
Yeah, you can be
really,
delivered from that. And
and
God
very,
says this about you, and this is what God's word says about you. And those things are true. These are, but there's a process. And I was in a position where I needed intervention
yeah.
and stabilization. And that accurate diagnosis saved my life.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
That began a journey to understanding what was happening inside,
Mhm.
why my brain was doing what it was doing, and began a process of relearning. I was like
Yes.
a person who had been in an accident that lost
Mhm.
cognitive ability, and I needed to relearn. I needed to learn how to walk again. I didn't
Yes.
think right. My
Mhm.
thoughts were deceptive inside my head.
Yes.
And so I couldn't begin that journey without the stabilization.
Mm.
And so while today I live unmedicated, I would definitely encourage somebody who's in the throes of the ups and downs of this unknowing, this lack of control of emotional stability, this lack
Yes.
of normal, to not push away the potential of medication to help stabilize and begin a path moving forward. I
I,
think there's wisdom in it.
I think too that, and again, even just in pastoring people, people come with this advice that people have given them sometimes, in the name of God. Do you know what I mean? Of
Yeah.
like, this is, and they've used things sort of out of context. And I think that there's no competition between medical diagnosis and the restoration of God. And so sometimes, we want to say that it's like conflicting, and it really isn't. I mean, I think that, I mean, I've just seen it in our own life and in our own marriage, that we're so thankful for the people that told him, like, this is actually what's happening. And these
Yeah.
are ways that you can reroute habits, and it takes
Yeah.
time. And so what I love about him is, even now he's like, I'm always learning. I'm all, and to be that learner that we're all called to be. But in this type of vein, it's a constant way of learning. So thank you for sharing that. What did life look like for you after, meeting this doctor that was able to diagnose you? And I love what you said, like, he saved your life, not just in your breathing life, but the value or not the value, but the quality of life with your family. I mean, God used him to help on your path of restoration in your relationships, I would say.
And he was an expert in pharmacology. He understood medication. He understood how to dial it in. Anybody who has been treated for mental illness knows that sometimes it takes a while to dial in effective treatment. And it's the
Yeah.
most frustrating thing. And I went through, from the time I knew I had an issue to the
Yeah.
time I got an accurate diagnosis of bipolar disorder, that was about 10 years of
Okay.
treatments that didn't work.
Yeah.
And so he was an expert in pharmacology, and he nailed it like right at the front. And we discovered that I am ultra sensitive to medications, and that what would be normal for one person was way too much for me.
Okay. So finding
And
that
so
right amount.
yeah,
So
and
sorry.
yeah, you go ahead.
I have to. My stuff is going dead. And that's horrible. I'm like, we're at this great point, and my stuff's going. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Now I got my cord.
Oh, good. So he helped with the medication part. My day program I continued with, and it helped with lifestyle changes and understanding mental illness properly.
Yes.
I didn't really understand it. I had no idea. I had no idea that my whole family for generations had dealt with this. Talk about the biggest victory in this. I want to shout it from the rooftops. We broke it. We broke it
Yes.
generationally, right? And my kids are witnessing how that and their own, like because they're all affected. My kids all have unique issues. And so I
Yes.
want to end with this hopeful.
Please.
So from the hospital, I learned lifestyle changes. And it sounds silly. We say it so tritely, but proper sleep, diet, and exercise.
Yeah.
And when you're suffering from bouts of depression or elation, you ignore sleep, exercise, and proper
Mm,
food.
you're so
And it's
right.
funny, before medication, before anything else, those three things have to be built into your lifestyle.
Mm,
I honor them. I honor my sleep. I honor my natural rhythms. For example, it would be a bad idea for me to go and take a corporate 9 to 5 job. That self-employment actually honors my rhythms, and actually educating online honors my rhythms, because I don't have to be on 24 hours a day.
right.
I can go
Yes.
through cycles because I still have cycles, even
Hmm.
though it's no longer debilitating. I'm no longer crippled by these
Yes.
cycles. I still have this part of my character is to be
Right.
debilitating, right?
Mm,
So coming out of it, I've watched how I've been able to advocate for my children. And so this is the huge part of it, is that as my kids witness my redemption and recovery,
yes.
I'm able to then speak into their lives and say, honey, I can see you're going through a hard time. I don't have all the answers to fix it, but I
Mm,
know this works for me. And I
yeah.
know it's going to hurt for a while. And I never fluff over anything with my kids. Like, so we go from my oldest at 34 with her kids. She's single. She's living doing it on her own. And she suffers from anxiety and depression. And those
Mm,
are just realities for her.
yeah.
But we're able to have candid conversations. It's not a forbidden conversation.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
My middle daughter, social anxiety is at 11 for her some days.
Mm,
She was 20 before she could ride a bus by herself.
mm. It's crippling anxiety.
It is crippling. It's life-altering anxiety. But
Right.
she's found a partner. They just bought their first house together. She has a job. She finished a college education. She's winning the
Mm,
battle.
yes.
My son, ADD and OCD with an oppositional tendency. We
Mm,
were told when he was very young not to expect very much for him, and that he probably wouldn't finish public school.
mm,
He's a college graduate.
mm.
Took him
Yeah.
longer than most, but he didn't give up.
But he did it. Yeah.
He did it, and he's got his own place. He's got a job. He's a creative soul, and he's doing it every day. And then my youngest daughter was diagnosed with what's called cyclothymia, which is the precursor to bipolar disorder.
Mm,
It's that elephant in the room where your kid's going to get this.
yeah.
But we have such candid conversations about the cycles, and it's
Mm,
almost a joke. It's like we know, like you hit that downward, and it's not a mystery. We don't
mm.
have to be afraid of it. And
Right. And it doesn't have to be a death sentence in
no,
living life. And I think that people need to hear that.
yeah. So I just wanted to share that 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 the restoration of my family isn't just the restoration of me, it's the restoration of generations from now,
Yeah.
because we're able to walk in this new victory imperfectly. I had no guidebook. I am not the perfect parent, clearly from my history. But we took the role of parenting so seriously and realized that we were ill-equipped and got help to parent well. We got help when we realized when my son came along that what worked for my two daughters when my son came along didn't work for him.
Yeah.
Every child is unique, and we had to learn new ways to parent each child. And we were open to it. We were completely open to it. We said our skill set is poor. Both of our backgrounds had poor parenting, and we sought help to learn new parenting skills, to lean in, to have honest, candid, difficult conversations with our children.
I think that, even you being brave enough to, check yourself in, to receive help, people think, oh, that's so brave. And it is, don't get me wrong. But I think it's just as brave to say, I need help parenting my kids, or I need help understanding that it's not a pride issue. Do you know what I mean? That sometimes
Yeah.
we aren't brave enough to say, like, you don't have to have this big addiction or mental health story. And I'm not
No.
negating that by any means, but to say, like, oh, I need help. One of the biggest things that we should do as Christ followers is to be humble enough to glean from the wisdom of others. That's how Christ built the body of Christ, is that we're supposed to help each other when we need help. We're supposed to rejoice and mourn with each other. But for some reason, we bought into this thing that by asking for help, that it's a failure when it's really not. It's actually super brave and leading well by saying, okay, this is what we're facing. How do I love my child enough and serve them? Because we're called to serve each other, including our children. How do I serve them enough to really understand them and how to help them know God's design for them? And that is actually mature, I think. I mean, that's actually a sign of maturity, though sometimes we do that out of desperation. But whether we realize it or not, it's actually the first thing we should have done.
Long ago. And I realized as I got better and realized in fact, my one of my doctors looked at me and said, Ron, you have no coping skills. And so realizing that I had no coping skills, what was I passing on?
Yeah.
And so I agree with that. And finally, I know we're getting short on time, and I just want to encourage people, because I have a suspicion that the people that are watching this are meant to watch this,
Yeah.
And I endured some very, very dark times, and my family has. But there is restoration and there is hope, and it's not on my timeline. It's not when I wanted it to be. In fact, there were times I didn't think I could ever live the life I'm currently living. And I just want to give you a small picture. This house is about 80% restored now. It's only taken 19 years. We just actually last week finished the front vestibule. Like, we do little things here and there, there and there.
Yeah.
But it's on his time, and the faith to believe that he can take whatever broke us and restore us.
Yeah.
I get to be a professional photographer and mentor and guide, and lean into my natural ability to teach and mentor.
Yeah.
I get to travel around the world, something I never thought would have been possible for me. I've been to the ends of the earth, literally to Antarctica and to the Arctic, as an expedition photography guide.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. I am the most fortunate man in the world. I get to say I've been married for 31 years.
Yeah.
2 grandchildren.
Yeah. That's that in and of itself is just God's beauty, that the enemy wants to be ashes. And several years back, in teaching some teenagers anyway, this whole thing, because they just come from different backgrounds and whatever, is that God's heart for us is to be daily perfected, to be more like him, not perfect. And sometimes we go for this perfection. And so your story is about being daily perfected. And even in the, what people would say, well, those were dark times. You were still being daily perfected. It was still part of the process of God's heart for you. And so anyway, so thank you for sharing that today. And I did, if you're viewing this on YouTube, we do have just how you can connect with Ron, whether it's for photography or you just want to reach out to say, hey, I really appreciated you just being vulnerable and sharing. And it just really connected with me. And we'll make sure that we have it in the show notes. And Ron, I just want to seriously thank you for just being humble enough and honoring enough to even what God has done and loving people enough to share just your story because people need to hear it. There's healing. Your story is healing for others and encouraging for others. And so, and I would say that it's healing for us when we share our story of just God's hands on our lives. So thank you for sharing. I'm just grateful. Friends, thanks for joining us on this episode of Table Talk. And if you have somebody in your life that would really just resonate with Ron's story of just, their story with God, really, because it is God's heart for their family, for just his love for them. But it's complicated in so many ways, but it's beautiful. Forward this to somebody to say, hey, there's just something that I want you to watch. Or maybe there is somebody in your life that is dealing what Ron and his family has dealt with, and you didn't get it. My heart for you is that by listening to his story, that you have come into new understanding from the person's viewpoint that is dealing with bipolar or that is dealing with undiagnosed, and just having a little bit of grace on their journey, that the way they're thinking or seeing things is different than you. And I just know in our own marriage that has been a learning experience for both of us of trying to communicate just what our thoughts of normal are in just certain what people would say normal situations, that we just see it differently, and just being able to walk on that path, which is just beautiful. And I would just say communicate. Communication is so key. Communication is so key. So Ron, thank you so much. I really appreciate. Would you just close us out in prayer? Would you mind doing that?
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, thank you.
Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together to have this time of heartfelt discussion of vulnerability and honesty about life's unique journey. Father, I want to thank you specifically for teaching me that there really is no normal. That our lives are always new, fresh every day, morning by morning, that every day is new, and that we can look forward to what you're going to do in our lives. Heavenly Father, bless those that have heard our talk today, and I just pray that they find hope in it, that although there were dark times, that your hand was always there, was always directing and guiding, and brought myself and our whole family to a place of restoration and of daily rejoicing for what you do for us. So, Father, I want to thank you for this time together. In Jesus' name.
Yes, amen. Thank you much. And now you are on to your next time for photography. So if someone is a photographer, you need to catch up with Ron. All right. Until next time, friends, just love well this week, and just know that we are called together to just reflect God's glory and be thankful that he's on a journey with us. So we'll see you next time, friends.